Committee members, the clerk has advised me that we are ready to begin the meeting as we have a quorum. I call the meeting to order, meeting number 21 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format as we have been for the last number of meetings. Members that are attending in person in the room attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. For those attending remotely, to get the chair's attention, please use the raised hand icon at the bottom of the screen. Those members in the room, simply raise your hand to get my attention. As well, this meeting is being held under interpretation service translation. If any member of the committee loses interpretation services, please indicate to me and we will suspend proceedings while we clarify the issue. Pursuant to Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, February the 3rd, 2002, the committee will commence its study of the Housing Accelerator Fund. I would welcome our guest, and each one will be given 5 minutes or less to give opening remarks. We have first Edith Cree, General Manager of the British Columbia. Bâtir son quartier. Edith Cree, General Manager. British Columbia Nonprofit Housing Association, Jill Atke, Chief Executive Officer, and from the City of Toronto, Abigail Bond, Executive Director, Housing Secretariat. We will start with Bâtir son quartier for 5 minutes, please. Madame Cree, you.
Bonjour.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the committee for the invitation to testify today. This is a social economy which is intended to meet the needs of people who have low income with affordable housing. We have achieved 450 projects. A few words on the context, which is a great cause of concern for all. With the great increase in housing costs, and the increased costs of construction and land, it is the lowest income households who can the least afford the new things. For us, social housing is a bulwark, a defense against precariousness. The interpreter asked if Madame Cyr could be asked to slow down a little bit, please. We were very pleased to see that in the last budget, the government made a priority of the housing shortage. And there were 3 main parts of the budget that were planned for this. So increasing the supply of housing, accelerating the construction and renovation of affordable housing, and supporting people in need. So the recommendations we have are to increase the housing.
Il est essentiel.
Yes, the interpreter has asked me if you would slow down, please, in your comments. They have difficulty following you.
Okay. Est-ce qu'on me demande à moi de ralentir un peu, non?
I'm being asked to slow down. Is that right? All right. I'm just pressured by the 5 minutes that I have. So it's essential that all efforts be made on all levels of government focus on the production and renovation of affordable housing. The market continues to create 30% of units that should have, or to create 100,000 new units in 5 years. So this has a great impact on the population. We should have be making a contribution at the level that is necessary so that people can pay an affordable price for housing in their communities. With the federal investments in these low rental housing units that could help in many sectors. So excess federal lands would provide some possible place to build these new places, these new homes. And this should really be for community housing and be entirely affordable. We think that the government should be a model and set the example in this. So speeding up the production rate. As for the $4 billion accelerator fund, we suggest that the money be directed to direct contributions to the creation of affordable housing rather than to administrative functions. One of the main obstacles to acceleration is in the real estate industry is legislation and regulations. We should be able to do more and do it more quickly. The selection of projects through calls for proposal are not a guarantee that the best projects will be selected. The results of the call will reflect the opportunities that were available at the time. Real estate needs predictability to direct opportunities to concrete realizations. The continuous entry remains the best option for managing the measures adopted for the financing of community and affordable housing. We need to be able to, more there are projects underway, the better chance we have to complete them, and we will deal with the limitations as they are. But in the short term, many projects will be held, and we can't put these budgets, stretch them out over 5 years. It should be over a 2-year period, and that's why from the outset sufficient number of projects must be selected to allow us to meet the objectives in the best time and timeline possible. So this is not even enough for the lowest income homes. So a level of subsidy does not make up the gaps here, and we think it would be desirable for the government to increase its participation in rent subsidies in Quebec. And so it requires programs that deal with the administrative problems and that have ongoing measures over the next few years, and that will allow us to speed up. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Cyr. Next, we'll go to Ms. Atke from the British Columbia Nonprofit Housing Association. Ms. Atke.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to the committee today. My name is Jill Atke, CEO of BC Nonprofit Housing Association, which is the industry association for nonprofit housing providers in British Columbia. I was also a panelist on the expert panel on the future of housing supply and affordability, which was appointed by the federal and provincial ministers of finance, and which put forward a recommendation for a similar fund to encourage and incentivize housing supply. I'll start out by saying that I absolutely support the comments of Edith, and in my comments today, I'll raise 6 principles to consider in the design of the Housing Accelerator Fund specifically. So first off, we need to reward the type of housing that we want to see more of in our communities. So some are going to argue that all supply is the right supply. I agree that this is true for rental housing. On ownership, we're seeing so much equity in the system that much of the supply, new supply that's built, gets consumed by existing homeowners who are buying second, third, and fourth properties as investments. The Acceleration Fund should prioritize the type of housing we desperately need in our communities: affordable rental housing and family-sized housing. The second principle I'd like to raise is to be cautious of a focus on unit counting. It's really important that government sets goals, and it has under this program, but I speak from experience on this, as our advocacy has often fallen into a similar trap. A really strict focus on the number of units encourages developers to build and municipalities to approve studio and 1-bedroom units, and not a lot of 2, 3, and 4-bedroom homes or homes large enough for multi-generational households. So the number of homes is important, but if incentives are on offer, the type of homes also matters. Thirdly, the Accelerator Fund should require annual per door incentives to be spent on affordable housing. So if the Accelerator Fund includes per door incentives, Canada should require that those funds be spent on affordable housing, which would help to close the gap on the National Co-Investment Fund projects or even RCFI projects under the new criteria set out in our most recent federal budget. Canada committed to building 50,000 new homes in the community housing sector over 10 years. We're not yet on track to meet this target. A move of tying annual per door incentives to spending on affordable housing could help to fill that gap by requiring municipalities to spend those dollars directly on affordable housing. Fourth, reward municipalities that create the right conditions for nonprofit housing development. When a nonprofit project enters the municipal approvals process, it's sensitive to three critical risks: time, cost, and uncertainty of approval. A rezoning, and many of our projects will add months to the project and cost in the range of $500,000 to $1 million, all at the expense of the tenants who will face increased rents as a result. Recent bylaw amendments in municipalities like Victoria and Vancouver mean that nonprofit developers can bypass rezonings and public hearings in many situations, eliminating or at least reducing all three of those risks. Municipalities that put forward such actions to eliminate those three barriers and make nonprofit and co-op housing allowable as of right should be rewarded by this fund. Fifth, encourage intensification of existing residential areas. Too much of our residential zoned land in large urban centers is zoned exclusively for single-family housing, pushing new supply into condo and rental towers along polluted and busy arterial roads, with homeowners resisting even moderate density increases in their communities. The Accelerator Fund should incentivize intensification of these inclusionary zones and disincentivize new greenfield development, particularly in the midst of a climate emergency. And then finally, require strong protections for renters. A great deal of our new housing supply in urban centers comes through redevelopment of existing properties. This is particularly true for rental development. This is in part because of the exclusionary zoning I mentioned previously, and in part because the assets are aging. With new incentives like the Accelerator Fund, this process of redevelopment will intensify and displacement will become an even bigger concern. The fund should require that strong tenant protections are in place for redevelopments. So while government will surely have many additional considerations when designing the Accelerator Fund, these few guiding principles will help to steer the program in the right direction. I thank you for your time today, and I'm happy to answer any questions when the time comes.
Thank you, Ms. Atke. We will now go to to Abigail Bond from the City of Toronto, but I would ask you to please speak slowly as the interpreters do not have a copy of your text, so if you would.
Okay. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. So the housing affordability crisis is affecting Toronto significantly, and playing our part in addressing it is a priority for the City of Toronto. We have almost 9,000 people each night staying in our shelter system, and Toronto has the highest number of households in core housing need of any major city at 23%, or 240,000 households. A recent report by the Toronto Board of Trade and Wood Green states that not taking action on affordable housing could cost the Greater Toronto Area economy around $8 billion over the next 10 years. We welcome the government's indication of both the $4 billion for the Housing Accelerator Fund and also the promise in the budget of additional investment in the National Housing Strategy. The solutions to housing affordability are complex and require an all-of-government and all-of-community response. Building on some of the comments of the previous witnesses, some of the key principles that will make the Housing Accelerator Fund successful are flexibility, to be performance-based, to be simple, predictable, ability to be aligned or stackable, to be rapid and also transformational. At the city, we know that housing supply is affected by density and municipal approvals and how streamlining approvals benefits affordability. We continually improve through our Concept to Keys program and see the potential funding from the accelerator to be beneficial. It will give us an opportunity to learn together about what is affecting supply and how that in turn affects affordability. In Toronto, for example, the number of homes approved does not equal the number of homes built. On average, we approve 28,000 residential homes a year, and around 15,000 of those homes are built. Reasons for this could be many, including economic factors, building industry capacity, supply chains, labor shortages, etc. We also want the accelerator to incentivize the affordable housing supply that will create density adjacent to transit. We suggest that the funds should be flowed direct and upfront to cities like Toronto, creating more funding certainty. This builds on the successful Rapid Housing Initiative approach, where accelerator funding could be provided upfront and direct to cities so that we can better plan our supply of affordable housing rather than going project by project. We have currently 109 affordable housing projects with around 19,000 affordable homes in various stages of approval and construction. If you give us accelerator money up front, we can roll up our sleeves and start to deliver some of those homes faster and with more affordability. We absolutely expect to be held accountable for increasing housing supply based on the homes we approve, based on things which are in our control. But if we can spend accelerator money on our local housing need and supply line, we can also ensure affordable homes are actually constructed. We know that low cost and innovative financing through the national housing programs like RCFI has been essential, but it has been insufficient. We estimate that we need grants of around $150,000 per affordable rental home to build in high value, dense and urban locations next to transit. And the accelerator provides us an opportunity to stack this along with other national housing strategy programs. We can focus our supply on the needs of meeting equity deserving groups, as many of them are experiencing poverty and housing challenges to a much greater degree than our average resident. The Accelerator Fund could also help us deliver on our Indigenous housing goals, supporting our truth and reconciliation approach. New housing supply on its own is insufficient to solve our affordability crisis, not least because our most valuable affordable housing is the supply we already created. And we can use accelerator money to support programs like Tower Renewal or our multi-unit residential acquisition program to support nonprofits to buy, secure, and reinvest in existing affordable rental homes. Finally, I just want to say that here at the City of Toronto, we are really ready to deliver on our share of that 100,000 homes. And if you could give us the accelerator money today, we could start delivering tomorrow. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Bond. We will now open the floor to questions, beginning with Mr. Genereux. You have 6 minutes, Mr. Genereux.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good to be back at one of my favorite committees here, HUMA. I do want to thank the witnesses for the testimony today, but I'll get right into my questions. So this Housing Accelerator Fund is obviously, we're still very much in the consulting phase, and I think that's what looking to some of your advice on how best to shape some of this. The program falls under the National Housing Strategy, which we've seen in 5 years and $24.9 billion committed, has only built 91,000 new units according to the government's budget. This new program alone is expected to build more than that, 100,000 more units, new middle-class homes, in the same time period, 5 years, with $4 billion. Now, I'm, I guess, a little bit skeptical that will happen, as that's more homes than all the programs under the National Housing Strategy combined. So I guess I'll start maybe with you, Ms. Bond, and then perhaps over to you, Ms. Adke. Are you as skeptical as me? And if the answer is no, which I expect it will be, any advice to the government on how to shape this fund so that it's actually a good program that will achieve the results that we're all hoping to see?
Thank you. I think what we've heard about the Housing Accelerator Fund so far is that it is really focused on an increase of housing supply, not just about affordable housing supply, where I think many of the National Housing Strategy actions and programs are really focused on delivering affordable supply. And so that takes more money, it takes different set of partners, and it takes a more intensive effort. I think we see an opportunity for a win-win here for government to create that large number of supply units, but also see a growth in affordable supply as well. And so we would encourage, further thinking about and I think some of the other witnesses mentioned this, building in the right locations, encouraging a variety of different units. We can really make a difference and harness the market, which is already building supply, to build a better supply that better meets the needs of Canadians.
And I want to come back to that exact point, but maybe we'll get Ms. Adke, if you don't mind, to provide some comments.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Genereux. I echo in some ways Abby's comments, and to your direct question as to whether or not I'm skeptical. I probably wouldn't be in this business if I wasn't an optimist. So I absolutely believe that the target is achievable. And as Abby mentioned, previous programs existing programs under the National Housing Strategy really are focused to a certain extent on more affordable supply, which does require a different, more risk within the nonprofit sector and a different set of partners. And we've seen incredible slowdowns through the process. I think Abby, in her introductory comments, also mentioned something really important, which was around escalating costs of new construction, as well as labor costs. And so I think the existing target of 100,000 new homes is achievable to some extent, already happening in this country. But back to the key principles that I mentioned, they need to be the right units in the right locations, targeted at the right populations, to be truly effective in meeting affordability targets.
So can I put you down as optimistic, but cautiously watching as we move forward? Is that a fair assessment, Ms. Adke?
I would say that's a fair assessment.
Perfect.
Yes.
So I guess lots of the stuff that we find we run into obviously falls under the municipalities, permitting, zoning, etc. However, a big issue in many of the big cities we see is NIMBYism, and we hear from countless stories of residents fighting and halting municipalities and developers from building in their area, especially when it comes to affordable housing. Can you expand on this and perhaps share how any NIMBYism delays or affects approval of new builds, specifically when it comes to affordable housing? I guess, Ms. Adke, why don't we go back to you first, and then maybe over to Ms. Bond.
Sure. In the most direct sense, the way that it affects nonprofit housing getting developed is we've actually had projects that have been halted and turned down in British Columbia because of NIMBYism most directly. The other ways, though, and I would say that's still reasonably rare. In the last 5 years, I know of 3 or 4 projects that have been turned down because of community opposition. But the way that it most directly impacts...
Sorry, Ms. Adke, before we move on from that point, is of those 3 or 4 projects, do you see room in this accelerator program to be able to address that, or would those issues still remain?
I think to a certain extent, we're always going to see some level of community opposition because we're past the point where quote unquote easy projects are done. So greenfield developments where you're going to run into less opposition. So we're seeing intensification of urban areas and significant change in communities. So there is going to continue to be opposition, but where the Accelerator Fund could be helpful is in requiring municipalities to intensify existing areas and incentivizing them to approve projects through, for example, a per door sort of reward for the approval, which gives that direct incentive, but also in some ways provides a bit of political cover. To your earlier question, the other ways that nonprofit developments are...
If you could, a short
Thank you.
Okay.
No, I'm okay. I would have taken too long.
Yes, and we're over by a minute. Thank you, Mr. Genereux. Now to Madame Martinez-Ferrata for 6 minutes.
Oui, merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question will be, first of all, to Ms. Cyr from Bâtir son quartier. Ms. Cyr, you mentioned the challenges that there can be for developing affordable housing in municipalities. So whether it's zoning because of zoning policies or to trying to get permits, the buying of the necessary land. So can you tell us a bit how you think that the housing accelerator could really be a benefit to speed up the building of housing in municipalities? You're on mute, Ms. Cyr. When I talk about the steps that we need to take, there's a limit to what you can accelerate. Sometimes when you want to develop projects, you can't make a plant grow by pulling it out of the earth. There are steps that have to be taken for the zoning, and there are regulations that have to be respected. So we can review them. We say to the cities that, for example, there's a coordination between the neighborhoods of Montreal and the central planning sector, but there's homework that all of the municipalities need to do. I think ultimately for myself, I don't know how it can help to say that there should be more money. I don't look at it at that level. And if I talk about the administration of projects, what really helps the realization of these projects, the achievement of them, to create affordable housing, it's to really target it directly in the projects that we have. And I think in the fund there's the possibility of saying to the municipalities, how do you see meeting this need? So it's administrative. So Ms. Cyr, you're saying it, and my next question will be to Ms. Adke as well, because she mentioned the issue of municipalities and the need for each of the different localities. So how can we meet local needs which may not be the same from one municipality to another? Exactly. So what you're saying that the fund, and Ms. Atke, you might want to add something, that the fund could support municipalities, for example, that need to buy land, which is not necessarily the case in every municipality. That's right. Ms. Atke?
That's correct. And I think it relates back to a point that Abby made, which is about flexibility. So the needs in every community are going to be different. And, you know, we've got municipalities in our region here in the Lower Mainland and other parts of British Columbia that have gone through and pre-approved nonprofit affordable housing. 1,000 units in Vancouver have been gone through the approvals process. City of Burnaby has 5 sites ready to go pre-zoned for development of affordable housing, but yet they're waiting for funding from senior levels of government.
Just so I know, I don't have a lot of time, but so what you're saying is a bit like Madame Cyr is saying, is that instead of giving the money to the municipalities in terms of administration and policy, it's giving the money directly to projects to make sure that it's actually going to the construction and not the administration of the municipality, of their zoning and their planning. And that's what you're saying?
I think a municipality could be rewarded for having the right processes and streamlines in place, but any money that comes from the federal government needs to be attached to direct spending in affordable housing. So it would go into those projects and close the gap that exists in national housing strategy programs right now.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I don't know how much time do you have left?
Oh, 2 minutes, Madame Ferretta.
Oh, great. So we have time. Madame Cyr, vous avez pas.
Ms. Cyr, you spoke about working perhaps on the issue, as Ms. Atke also said, a better looking at the stages of the investment. So does that mean that the accelerator should also be tied to the entire amount funded, perhaps by the provinces? Who's the question for? To you. Yes, that's quite right. We hope that the federal government programs will have the flexibility and adaptability to complete existing programs. But when there is no existing program, we're also hoping to see government programs, what I call self-opening. I mean, there are many openings. There are the realities are so different from one community to another. And we would like to see that opening. So if we achieve the goal, then the program has to be adaptable and, yes, come to complete other funding models, because we're currently in a period where programs are quite rare, where you can get the total funding necessary from one single place. So often we're looking left, right, and center to get the funding. So it takes a lot of time, and that's not the way to speed things up. So if there were connections between the programs, that would be so much better.
Just in terms of how do we level the playing field for community organizations to tap onto the programs, and especially in this, in the accelerator fund that we want to put, what can we do to make sure that we are making sure that community organizations and nonprofit organizations can go in and get help on those programs?
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chairman, I had no interpretation there.
Okay, just a moment.
It's okay now. Yeah.
Shabbat? Is it translating now? Oui?
C'est moi?
No, Madame.
Oui, la réponse.
Yes, the answer is that now there is interpretation. But the last question asked, there was none.
Okay, merci. A short answer to Madame Martinez-Ferretta's question, please.
I can take a run at that. So the way to level the playing field is and this is a process underway, restructure both the co-investment fund and the rental construction finance initiative, because the landscape has changed since those programs were introduced in 2018. Abby touched on it, the need in large urban centers for additional grant money in order to build truly affordable housing has shifted dramatically over the last 4 or 5 years. So a restructure of those programs is required, and the accelerator fund can make up some of that difference.
Thank you, Madame Martinez-Ferreira. Madame Chabot pour 6.
Madam Chabot, you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much. So, microphones and masks. Thank you so much, the three of you, for very relevant testimony today. We would like to hear you for some hours more. So if this is an issue that really deals with all of the social, political, and human concerns, it would be housing that would, whether there isn't a single day that we don't see it. In Quebec, it's true in all of our regions, in all of our municipalities, of the crisis in housing. And so how this new accelerator fund could really help. And it's not that I'm not an optimistic. I'd like to see the glasses half full, but we also know that with the gaps between the supply and the demand in housing, that the gap is huge. And also some housing is not adaptive for families. So, Ms. Cyr, you said something in your testimony. This fund is supposed to be for 5 years, $4 billion, and you said speed it up, lay it out over 2 years. And I understand that the money is available. If we knew it was available right away, we'd be able to act more quickly in the development of new projects and not to think about administrative concerns. So could you talk a little bit more about that, please? Yes, thank you. In the end, developing housing projects is an obstacle course. When you want, for example, to say that there's a target to build 10,000 units in a year, if we start to build 10,000, we won't reach it. So we'll have to start 2 or 3 times that number if you want to reach the target for the year, because on some projects things go well, and then for others there are problems and it slows down. So they will get built, but it won't be done so quickly. So if I double or triple the projects that are launched, I'm immediately more likely to meet the target in the time period. And if I need to do that at the outset, not wait till the 5-year period is up. We saw that with the achievement of projects in Quebec when we had programs that ran over several years where we could do what we called overbooking. Then we were better able to reach our goals than if we were really tight and when administrations were obliged to choose the exact number, and they never built within the time frame planned at the outset. I like the overbooking expression very much. Thank you. So, but you're overbooking in what way? Often, in my mind, there's a distinction, and maybe I'm wrong, but between affordable housing and social and community housing. So we can talk about affordable housing, and you saw in Montreal, there's a definition that we had at some point in time, and that a rental at $2,200 a month was affordable housing. So do you think that we're too focused on the private sector rather than the community sector with this kind of effort? Well, in all of history, I mean, I have a weakness for community housing. Yes, I have a soft spot for that. But I think that the crisis in housing is huge. We have to multiply the number of tools that we need. We need a huge toolbox with many tools. However, community housing has shown us that we can meet our goals with some affordable housing. But I think we should maybe up the goals in terms of community housing, even if we turn to the private sector and have some requirements there. I wish to see community housing used more, yes. And a final question, when you talk about a supplement to rent in Quebec, that's really a concern that's gone. Prices have gone up by more than 30% in some areas. So when we talk about supplements for rentals, it's for individuals. Yes, for some housing projects, what happens great is that we allow people to build and renovate, but even when there are subsidies, it's not enough to allow people who are in the lowest income brackets. They need personal assistance for that. So in the programs, when we say that we're targeting affordable housing, I think there has to be different categories. So people who have a modest income need something, but people who have a really low income need more help. So there is affordable housing assistance available in Quebec, but I forget the term here, but there's a personal assistance that's possible through federal funding, but that assistance is not enough to make the difference between the person's ability to pay and the price of rent. And if I understand correctly, this should be outside of the $4 billion for the Housing Accelerator Fund. Well, regardless of where the money comes from, the needs are tremendous. So I'd rather do a little bit less, but try and meet the targets for those who are in most need, rather than saying we can't do it, but we can't help the people who are most in need in Canada. Thank you.
Shabbat, Madame Zarillo, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll start first with Ms. Atke, just to talk about not leaving people behind. I wanted to focus on strong tenant protections that she spoke to, and then I'll go to Ms. Bond on using what we have in regards to what's already built, and I'll have some questions about short-term rentals there. And then if I have time, I'll go to Ms. Sear just to talk about these operating funds versus subsidies to cities. So just going to Ms. Atke, my question, you raised about the strong tenant protections, and I know right now the number is about 3 to 1 on displacements of old affordable housing or aged affordable housing versus what's being built. And I worry a lot about persons with disabilities, single parents, and seniors that are in these housing units. So I just wonder if you could expand on what those strong tenant protections need to look like, and if you have any additional information on what's happening to renters in this redevelopment market that we see in urban centers anyway.
Great, thank you for the question, Ms. Zarillo. First, on the 3 to 1 ratio that you mentioned, through acquisitions, there are significant number of investors purchasing older purpose-built rentals. So we know in British Columbia we lost about 34,000 units of rental housing renting below 750. So for every new unit of affordable housing we're building, we're losing 3 units. Nationally, that figure is 1 to 15. And so Abby spoke to the need for an acquisition strategy. And that's exactly what gap this would fill to stop the loss of existing rental, because that's really the most affordable rental that we have today. And then on displacement, increasingly municipalities are introducing strong tenant relocation and tenant protection measures. There are really no provincial, and certainly not any federal, but it's more of a provincial mandate. There are no provincial protections in place when a rental building gets redeveloped. It oftentimes redevelopment is really, really critical because we get additional supply from that redevelopment, but we need to make sure tenants are protected through that. And so if we're going to be incentivizing new rental development through the acquisition strategy, I would suggest that needs to come attached to really strong tenant protection provisions so that people, when displaced, are not seeing a rapid escalation in their rents, and they have first right of refusal to come back to the new redevelopment at existing rents.
Thank you so much.
I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you so much. And so important to make sure that those that are being displaced can come back in a unit that they can afford, for sure. So I'm going to go to Ms. Bond just on the, there are limitations. You mentioned trade, supply chain, those sort of things. And then you mentioned about the opportunity to utilize what's already built, what we already have. How can we accelerate what we already have to make it maybe expand the number of units or upgrade or the maintenance? So I wanted to ask you if you could expand on that a little bit. And also, too, I I hear a lot about short-term rental and some of these new builds. I know in my city, in Coquitlam, where I was before, I've heard about 10s, 12s, even more units being bought by one person and being used for short-term rentals. And even on housing agreements, the language in the housing agreement talks only about a minimum of 30 days. So I'm just wondering if there's opportunity to do something too around limiting short-term rentals in already built inventory.
Yes, thank you for that. Obviously, the Housing Accelerator Fund is very much focused on new supply. I think I just wanted to highlight at the city that should we be able to secure some of the funding from the accelerator, then we can use that to respond to kind of local need and local priorities. And one of our key objectives is to look not just at the creation of new affordable rental supply, but to support partners to protect what we already have. So we have a couple of big programs at the city. We have a tower renewal program, and we also have a multi-unit residential acquisition program, which puts nonprofits in great positions so that they can bid and acquire units on the market to secure them as long-term affordable housing. They may be naturally occurring affordable housing, but unless they're secured, then that can often change as a result of speculation. So this is a local kind of issue here at the city, and we could really apply the Accelerator Fund to help us with that. Your question then about short-term rental, I think you touch on something, which is there isn't going to be one solution to our affordability crisis. Again, not just we need to protect existing, we don't just need to create new supply, but we also need innovative and creative housing policy so that precluding short-term rentals or limiting the impact on market rental supply. And in addition, I would also include kind of in that basket of policies, things like vacant homes tax, for example, so that we're really utilizing the supply that we've created over many years to the benefit of the people who live and work in our city.
Thank you, Ms. Bond.
12 seconds.
Okay, just wanted to ask very quickly, do you have some data around who's living in these units? As I mentioned earlier, I'm concerned about persons with disabilities getting displaced, single mothers, seniors. Is there any data you could share with this committee about who's in some of that older housing supply, especially rental right now, that you could share in writing later?
Yeah, we can look to see what we could provide for you on that. I don't have data with me right now, but we can certainly look, and I'm sure my other witnesses here would also have information as well.
Any member witness, if you have information, you can provide it in writing to the committee. It would be greatly appreciated. Now, Madame Kusi for 5 minutes.
I thank the witnesses for being here today with us.
$800. That's how much it costs right now to pay someone to stand in line for a passport at Service Canada. Many Canadians across the country are showing up at 8:30 a.m. in the morning and sleeping overnight in an effort to obtain service. In one situation, Mr. Chair, a family made 5 unsuccessful attempts to go to Service Canada in an attempt to receive service, and were not successful in receiving their passports. Mr. Chair, Canadians are suffering, putting off weddings, births, family vacations, honeymoons, and in far too many cases, funerals. Mr. Chair, this government restricted travel for Canadians for an extended period of time.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
They had the opportunity to anticipate the pent-up demand and prepare for it.
It's been a point of order.
Obviously, this is an important issue that the member's speaking about, but are we talking about the Accelerator Fund and housing right now?
I do not believe so.
I'm getting to my point. Thank you.
If you could get back to the topic,
Thank
Madame
you.
Kusi.
The government was also aware of the anniversary of the 10-year passport being implemented and failed to prepare for that. Mr. Chair, Canadians are frustrated and heartbroken. They need action and solutions. And with that, Mr. Chair, I would like to move the following. That the committee invite the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development to appear for 1 hour on the Service Canada delays for passport renewals and that this meeting take place before May 30th, 2022.
Thank you, Madame Kuzi. So we have Madame Kuzi moved a motion. Any discussion on that motion? The motion is in order.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chairman?
Okay, Madame Ferrara.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chairman, I thank my colleague for that motion. I understand, as well as she does, that this is an important issue at this point in time, and I would be in favor. I would like to support her if she would accept an amendment which would be to add the department to the motion so that the minister be accompanied by officials when they're invited to before the committee.
We have an amendment.
Oui, on fait d'avoir.
Yes, we want to have the minister. Yes, I think that's enough to have the two. If the minister is there, that's enough. But if we could have the officials from the department as well, that would be good. But I think it's really important to have the minister present. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mr. Chairman, we'd be in agreement, particularly that we're dealing with such an important issue now. And we're talking right now about housing, which is an even more important issue. So I would invite my colleague, if we could move quickly, to support the motion and come back to the witnesses we have for today. I would be happy that if we could continue with the witnesses after we vote.
Madame Kuzi, committee members, we have a motion moved. It was in order by Madame Kuzi. There was an amendment moved by Madame Martinez Ferrara. We will deal with the amendment first. All those in favor of the amendment by Madame Ferrara? Sorry, I will need to do a recorded vote because we have some virtual and some in the room. So, Madame Clerk, would you do a recorded vote on the amendment of Madame Martinez Ferrara?
Mr. Long.
Support.
Can you repeat that, Mr. Long?
Support.
Mr. Coteau.
In favor.
Mr. Collins.
In favor.
Mr. Van Bynen.
In favor.
Madame Martinez Ferrara.
En faveur.
Ms. Kuzi.
In favor.
Mr. Ruff.
In favor.
Mr. Leipert.
Supportive.
Mr. Generou.
In favor.
Madame Chabot.
Pour.
Ms. Cirillo.
In favor.
12 yeas.
The amendment has been carried. We'll now move to a recorded vote on the motion of Madame Kuzi as amended. Madame Clerk, call a recorded vote.
Mr. Long.
Support.
Mr. Coteau. You're muted, Mr. Coteau. You're on mute.
In favor, thank you.
Mr. Collins.
In favor.
Mr. Van Bynen.
In favor.
Madame Martinez Ferrara.
En faveur.
Ms. Kuzi.
In favor.
Mr. Ruff.
In favor.
Mr. Leipert.
In favor.
Mr. Generou.
In favor.
Madame Chabot.
Pour.
Ms. Cirillo.
In favor.
12 yeas, 0 nays.
To Madame Kuzi for 3 minutes. It's my understanding practice of committee is to suspend while a vote is being carried. So you used up
Sure,
roughly 3 minutes.
I will cede my time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Kuzi. We'll now go to Mr. Collins for Mr. Coteau. Mr. Coteau, Mr. Collins.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I will be sharing my time with MP Collins, half of the time allocated. So my question is to Abigail Bond, Ms. Bond. I found that your presentation was very interesting. The fact that 19,000 units are currently being built in the city. The last time I checked, there was about 80,000 people waiting for some type of community housing in Toronto, but also when it comes to affordable housing in general, I think that number would be much larger. So I have a couple of questions. Number one, when we use the term affordable housing from a Toronto perspective, and I'm asking this because I represent a riding in Toronto. When we say affordable housing from a city perspective, what are we talking about? And can the Accelerator Fund, is there an opportunity to look at alternative housing possibilities, non-traditional, so secondary suites, lane homes, garden homes, tiny homes, things like that? Are there opportunities there for the city to work with the federal government to look into that type of development of units as well?
Thank you for the question. The short answer to the last part of your question is yes. I think there's lots of opportunities for housing, which is often termed kind of missing middle housing, middle density, gentle intensification. There's lots of opportunities there, and the city is definitely working on some of those policies. I would, in terms of affordable housing, describe two different types of housing the city that we look to create. One is affordable housing, where you're really looking where there's a link still to the market, but it's a subsidized, as opposed to community housing or social housing, where the rent that you pay is really linked to your income. And I would just highlight that the challenge that we referenced with affordable housing, the stackability of national housing strategy programs actually relates to affordable housing. If we want collectively to build community housing, social housing, many of those units will need ongoing subsidies in addition to the capital subsidies necessary. So that's an even bigger hill to climb in terms of delivering that kind of housing in an expensive urban environment.
Thank you, and I'll turn it over to MP Collins. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you. And thank you to the witnesses for their attendance today. I think we need to set the record straight first and foremost on the national housing strategy and what it's provided in terms of supports. To date, it's $30 billion, just to be clear, for 440,000 units. And that's not just new units, that's for renovation and repair as well. So I think that's important to get on the record. And I'm glad that and I think I wrote this down properly, Ms. Bond, you mentioned in your submission, I think, 28,000 residential homes per year are approved by the City of Toronto, and 15,000 are built. And I wrote down here 60,000 are permitted but not built. And we have a Conservative leadership candidate who has tried to portray municipalities as the bad guys for a lack of housing supply. And as someone who was in the municipal field for 25 years, I know full well that municipalities are doing everything they can, and your numbers certainly dispel the myth that's been created by this person. So thank you for providing that. But can I just confirm I have those numbers right? 28,000 units per year, 15,000 of which are built, and you have 60,000 that have been permitted but haven't been constructed by the developer.
Yes, thank you for that question. I can confirm that those numbers are correct. And you highlight an important issue for us, which is that whilst we're doing well to actually create housing supply, we're seeing our inventory grow at about 1.7% a year, while our population is growing at about 1.1. The challenge is that the market, the supply that's being created, is not necessarily meeting the affordability needs of the population that live in our city. So I think that's one of the things that's creating the crunch, and we would be very open to the accelerator helping us not just see units approved, which is important, we have our part to play in that, but see them actually built and constructed as well.
Thank you for that. And that leads to my next around the issue of affordability. sorry, and it is one versus the administration question support for bricks and mortar. Can you provide in terms of where the better bang for the buck is in terms of providing support to municipalities?
Thank you. I can really only speak on behalf of the City of Toronto. We definitely see some benefits for investment in soft infrastructure that would help with the planning process, with staffing and resources. But I think the majority of the funds that we would want to apply would be to more directly apply to local housing need. And so building, buying land or investing in existing affordable housing projects so that we can close the gaps on some of the other national housing strategy programs, I think would be a real target for us in terms of that money. And so the money potentially, if it came direct to us, would flow through us to nonprofits who are, and in some cases, developers who are actively building those kind of mixed income affordable rental housing projects.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. We will conclude because we were dealing with committee business. So if it's okay with the witnesses, we will conclude with the round with Madame Chabot and Madame Zerillo to conclude this first hour. Is the witnesses okay with staying another 6-7 minutes? I know you were scheduled for the first hour to conclude at 4:30. So if I see agreement, Madame Chabot for 2.5.
Thank you. Look, the examples are important in what you are telling us, and there's a great concern in the major urban centers. I'll explain my question. If we're talking about Quebec, there are the urban centers, but also the regions and rural areas. So, Madame Cyr, you talked about the cost of construction and inflation. And I know that it doesn't translate equally or in the same way from one region to another, urban versus rural. So how do you see this in the use of all the sums that have been approved for new projects and renovation projects? Well, you're right. From region to region, the costs can vary. Land is more expensive in urban centers, and in the regions, they might say, well, the land isn't the most expensive, but other things are more expensive. So what's important is to have a target, because people, and if they are receiving benefits, the amounts are the same. From wherever they might live. And so we need to have targets, and we need to know what the variations in costs are from one region to another. So it's possible to modulate the funding models, taking into account certain realities. So sometimes it can be a fact that there's one reality in this or in the urban centers and another in a rural area. So changing the subsidies in terms of the region in question, but also always with the target of the rental amount, and it has to correspond to the person's ability to pay. So the target has to be based also on the income to take into account lower incomes. Yes. But not a rental that is established as a result of the income. Yes, that's right. In terms of federal properties, you mentioned, and perhaps I misunderstood, but that this land should be given to the community center. That's what I wrote down. Well, I said that the federal government should lead by example, and I think that of the models that we've seen and what seems to really hold up for the sustainability, I think that for federal lands, they should have a high percentage of housing units that are nonprofit to ensure that there is sustainability for the affordable housing sector. So I don't say all of it, but a high percentage of it, and it needs to be determined how much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Cyr and Ms. Chabot. And now, Ms. Zerillo.
Chair, I'm actually going to go back to Ms. Adke because I'm very interested in speaking about the rental opportunities and accelerating the rental needs. And I just wanted to dig a little bit deeper on the short-term rental apps. We know that some of these apps in all of our economy are not necessarily regulated so well. So yeah, I was just wondering on the short-term rental apps. Does your organization have access to data around those app providers for short-term rentals? And do you have any insights in that area where we maybe could potentially unleash some housing units fairly quickly if we addressed multiple units used for short-term rental through an app?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Zarillo. We don't have direct access to data from the apps, but I am aware of a number of studies that have explored the impact of short-term rental on the rental market more broadly. And some of the municipal restrictions on short-term rental have been quite effective. But I do think it speaks to a greater need in terms of sort of if we're looking at the accelerator fund, the quick wins that may be possible. And it relates to as well a point that Abby made around approvals versus what gets built. In British Columbia, we've got 10,000 affordable homes that have made it through the municipal approvals processes, have been fast-tracked by municipalities, and are actually waiting for funding from senior levels of government. And so that's 10,000 affordable homes in the nonprofit sector right here in British Columbia. And I'm sure that similar pattern exists right across the country. So that all of a sudden that 100,000 homes becomes quite achievable if we have the right programs structured in the right way. And so looking for those sort of quick win opportunities. And the challenge with doing that with short-term rental is just being able to do it at scale. And it's challenging for nonprofits to access those units sort of on a one-off basis. So I would rather see incentives in place and funding in place to get approved housing built out in the next couple of years.
Thank you so much.
Cirillo, and thank you to all the witnesses for appearing today on this important study. That concludes the first hour. We'll suspend for a few minutes while we transition to in-camera to return to consideration of the seniors report. Again, thank you, witnesses. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Thank you.